I won't take too long. I'll try and just make a few brief remarks. I am a biologist, actually, and it's interesting. It just struck me listening to Warren that and when the Senator also mentioned he was first in family to go to university, I was too. And at the age of about 14, I was asked by my school what subjects I wanted to study. And at the time, I had this passion for biology, and I thought it was the most interesting thing that I could possibly do. And my career advisor at the time advised me, no, Colin, don't do biology, son. Biology is for girls. You need to do something like engineering and get yourself a proper job. And at 14, what do you say? I actually thought he might be right, which says a lot. He was actually, my careers advisor was a metalwork teacher. Luckily, due to various circumstances, in the end, I didn't listen and I got to do biology. Says something about perhaps then, though, what makes us, what governs our choices at an early stage in our education, and actually how difficult it might be to predict the future. And I think that has never been truer than today. And one of the issues about universities educating students for jobs is rather difficult, because in 10 years' time, I suspect, most people who will be in jobs that today we can't even predict. So we have to prepare students not just for jobs, yes, of course, for employment. Naturally, we want to prepare them for employment. But we also have to prepare them for uncertainty and for unpredictability and for disruption, because the future workplace will be nothing if it is not disrupted. What are universities for? We're here to educate people to navigate that future. I heard a little bit of a sucking intake of breath around the ATARs of students who go to university. It's interesting, if you just do the math, it's pretty hard to get 40% of students to go to university unless the ATARs are down at about that level. Because not all the minimum would be an ATAR of 60, that allows 40% of graduates to go to university. But of course, not all choose to go. And so the ATAR naturally has to be in the 50s. It's a statistical requirement of the target. But interestingly, actually, not all students who come to Flinders come with an ATAR. We actually take students who left school, went off and did something else. Some of them did a qualification perhaps at TAFE. Some of them have earned some other life experience. Some of them take an entry exam and come to us. And we were shown some data at Flinders just recently that demonstrates students who come in on those non-ATAR pathways are actually succeeding to almost exactly the same degree as any of our others. And so we've got to be sure that when we're discussing the impact of ATAR on apparent quality, that we're also looking at what the outcomes actually are. There has been great growth in the cost of higher education to the federal government. We acknowledge that. It's clearly the case. Of course, it's been in part created by the demand-driven system. We have to think why that has occurred, why that growth has occurred. And of course, speaking as someone who has the privilege of running a university, the way in which we can maintain even the status quo in funding terms is a constant battle to grow our numbers, because otherwise we have no means of increasing our revenue other than finding alternative sources of students, and hence the growth that we see in international students across the country. We heard a lot during the debate on fees, on the fear of fees, and on the $100,000 degrees. Well, let me tell you, $100,000 degrees are with us today. They have been for a while. It costs much more than that to educate a medical student. It's just the student themselves doesn't pay anything like that much. The rest of the cost is subsidized, of course, by government, but of course what that really means is paid by the taxpayer. Now, all those years ago when I was lucky enough to go to Edinburgh University, I was also lucky enough to be provided with a full fees grant, so I had no fees to pay at the time. It is, to me, interesting to go back and to note that at that time, and it was 1979, at that time, the marginal rate of income tax in the United Kingdom was 83%. At the same time here in Australia, it was 61%. Tax rates have come down somewhat considerably. I'm not suggesting that's entirely because of the cost of higher education. And health fees, of course it isn't. But nonetheless, in a very different tax regime, we clearly do need to look at the balance between the public contribution to university education versus the private contribution, and getting that balance right is critical. But of course, university education is about two things. It's about the private good, that individual going off and getting a job and having a fantastic career and doing wonderful things for themselves, but it's also about the public good. It's about educating people in subject areas, in degrees and disciplines that society needs, be they doctors, be they nurses, be they paramedics or teachers, in all sorts of disciplines where society has a demand for trained people in those disciplines. Then the public has, I think, an obligation to provide some of that funding. And it's a question of getting the balance right. So I do welcome the statement from the Minister and the policy document. I very much welcome the policy security that we have for the next 18 months or so as we go through the discussion. But in particular, of course, I welcome the opportunity to have that discussion about the relative merits of the public and private good and the relative costs to the student and the individual. But I would say that in terms of having a finite number of students that will go to university, one has to have a really clear view of the potential impact that has on preventing access and limiting access to people who would have otherwise an enormous capacity to contribute to our society. Thank you.